Livestock are important assets in Africa, helping improve the nutritional status of millions of people and contributing to economic growth. But in the age of a changed climate and diminishing resources, can these roles continue, and is there hope for rural economies fully dependent on animal rearing as a livelihood? We are standing outside the Palace of Nations, the UN offices here in Geneva, Switzerland, and a global conversation is going on across the street on reducing deaths and economic losses from disasters. But out here, inflatable animal ambassadors have been positioned to remind the world and indeed the global leaders attending the conference on the need to protect animals in times of disaster.
World Animal Protection is here to represent animal voices, and to do that we thought we would bring 6 animal ambassadors from across the world to attend the conference here in Geneva, because we believe that animals need to be part of the conversations around disaster preparedness, around policies and plans. So these inflatable animals that we've brought are in place of real animals, which we obviously couldn't bring to Geneva. And they all carry the same message from across different countries, which is that they should not be forgotten in these conversations that are taking place here in Geneva.
A 2013 study by Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in 7 African countries shows that between 44 and 79% of rural households keep livestock. But it is important to note that within those numbers are pastoral communities that do not just keep animals, but are totally dependent on them. They are often incapable of replacing huge populations of livestock lost to cycles of drought. Animal lobby group World Animal Protection is making submissions to the global players in disaster risk reduction to make policy and program considerations that would go beyond protecting people to protecting productive assets.
Animals are so integral to people's lives that if we don't protect them, then the consequences on the people who depend on those animals is extremely negative. For example, 1 billion of the world's poorest people rely on animals for their livelihoods. If they lose those animals, then they will immediately have a severe economic impact on their family and on the national economy of those countries. So our campaign really is to emphasize that by protecting animals, you protect humans as well.
Put practically, if the camels of the Sahel would occupy the seats in this row, and the goats of northern Kenya would occupy the next, or think about the animals of Mozambique and Malawi that were affected in the cyclones, if they could be present in this room, what is it that they could have asked of the global leadership?
Animal disasters are defined in 2 major categories. Animal disease emergencies. Now these are diseases that affect animals and have the same impact like a natural disaster. Actually, they impact the society the way an earthquake would impact the society. And this is because if you get a big disease like foot and mouth affecting herds and herds, it destroys livelihoods, and its impact on that community and that society and that country is as if they were hit by an earthquake. The second category is what we call animal disaster emergencies. And these are animals being affected by natural disasters and even man-made disasters very much the same way people are. So you find that animals are caught up in floods the same way we are. They are affected by droughts. They are caught up in volcanic eruptions. And the protocols for dealing with animal disease emergencies and animal disaster emergencies are actually not the same. So what we are doing in Africa is actually introducing or encouraging communities and governments to put in place procedures, plans, and resources to be able to deal with animals and disasters.
Beyond interventions that will help individual communities cope with climatic and resource challenges, policy considerations suggested at the Global Platform in Geneva are a much broader look at securing a critical economic sector and ensuring food security going forward.
When there is a drought, or when there is a flood, people lose their livestock. And if you remember, this is the capital. For them, it is the capital. Okay, it is their asset. Livestock is real asset. You take children to school with that. It is your reserve. It is your insurance. It is your stock. If they lose it, you will find them in the slums, in the cities, if not in the Mediterranean.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that beef and pork consumption in Africa will both increase 200% by 2050, while that of chicken will rise 211%. If that demand is to be met without further stretching the trade imbalance that many African nations are already grappling with, long-term approaches have to be made to address the challenges that livestock keepers are faced with, key among them weather shocks. In Kenya, the Ministry of Agriculture, with the support of World Animal Protection, is proposing a parliamentary bill to create the Animals in Disasters Fund under the Directorate of Veterinary Services to facilitate rapid response to animal disasters in Kenya.
This fund is for government at the national and the county level to allow the Directorate of Veterinary Services to immediately deploy within the first 24 hours to an animal emergency. Because the whole aim of an animal emergency is to rapidly identify it, contain it, and eradicate it. If you take 2-3 weeks to do that, you have lost that war. So we want a fund available to them. Who will have access to this fund? Basically, it is the ministry doing what the government should be doing, which is dealing with emergencies at the community level. So the community, the animal owners, will be the beneficiaries.
Enactment of such law would obligate the government to take responsibility in protecting animals in disasters and define ways in which this will be achieved. The livestock sector in Africa is still mainly dependent on smallholder farmers managing their stocks traditionally. In many cases, operating in difficult locations with limited resources. This kind of intervention would be important in making new knowledge, technology, and financial instruments accessible where they are most needed.
We have established under World Animal Protection that the greatest responsibility in animal disasters belongs to two categories of people: animal owners and governments. Because governments are the ones who will do the big policies, the structures, allow holding sites, agreements for animals to move. So they need to put in place those protocols. Animal owners, on the other hand, are the first responders for animals. Within the first 48 to 72 hours, what that animal owner does will determine whether his animal dies or survives or is resilient immediately after. So this fund will help in building these resilience. It will be very delineated to preparedness, response, and early recovery. Thereafter, the actions will be developmental and they'll return back to normal ministerial actions.
Having made their voices heard at the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, these animal ambassadors will be heading out to different countries to be used in caravans seeking policy, education, animal disaster funding, and greater involvement of rural communities in reducing vulnerabilities of animals to disasters. Even more importantly, the organizers hope to have convinced other stakeholders at the conference to go beyond protection of people to also seek protection of animals and other productive assets in times of disasters. From the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in Geneva, Switzerland, I am David Owino, reporting for the Africa Development Journal.